The chamber of Galactic Command stood as the pinnacle of order in the galaxy. Species that had once warred for dominance now debated strategy across luminous tables, their voices rising in harmonic discord. From insectoid strategists with crystalline thoraxes to towering reptilians with scales that shimmered like armor, the chamber was a living testament to unity forged through centuries of treaties. These were the architects of peace and war, rulers of vast armadas and countless colonies, accustomed to controlling outcomes with precise calculations. They had faced every variety of uprising, rebellion, and invasion. None had ever unsettled them. Until the reports about humans began to arrive. The humans were catalogued as a backwater civilization from the edge of the Orion Arm. Their worlds were considered scattered, resource-poor, and politically divided. In the official archives, they were rated as an emergent species, the kind that might one day be useful as mercenaries or miners but not worthy of serious strategic concern. For decades, their ships were dismissed as crude, their diplomacy as chaotic, their culture as erratic. They were an afterthought, barely considered during the grand discussions of trade routes and territorial boundaries. It was only when scout patrols began disappearing that whispers started in the side halls of command. At first, the assumption was piracy. Pirates had always been the persistent irritation at the edges of empire, annoying, but manageable. Yet these losses carried peculiar traits: destroyed beacons, erased flight logs, distress signals that abruptly cut off mid-transmission. When an entire logistics convoy vanished en route to a secure outpost, even the most complacent members of the chamber leaned forward. Still, the official line held. It was an inconvenience, not a threat. That illusion broke when Outpost K-72 went dark. Situated on a barren moon and protected by layered defense satellites, it was the model of stability. For 200 years, no unauthorized vessel had pierced its perimeter. The command had stationed 3,000 troops there, complete with orbital shields, interceptors, and ground artillery. It was, by all calculations, unassailable. Yet one rotation later, nothing remained but a smoldering ruin and fragments drifting into the void. The first reports were so unbelievable that they were nearly dismissed as fabrications. A surviving sensor buoy revealed only fragments, streaks of light cutting through the shield grid, columns falling silent, brief flashes of ground combat before static consumed the feed. Analysts replayed it frame by frame, searching for signatures, formations, or any recognizable pattern. What they found instead was chaos. No announcement of intent. No declaration. No parley. Simply impact. The command gathered an emergency convocation. A dozen languages filled the chamber, overlapping in confusion. Some argued that the attackers could not possibly be human, that it must be some new predator species using their insignia as a ploy. Others laughed at the notion that a species still arguing among themselves on their homeworld could destroy a fortress so effortlessly. The humans, in their eyes, were impulsive and unpredictable, but far too limited to mount such an assault. Then the evidence became undeniable. Recovered fragments of metal bore human markings. Comms intercepts contained English phrases shouted in the heat of battle, crude but chilling, terse orders, clipped acknowledgments, defiance screamed into the void. A battered alien survivor, delirious in medical confinement, described human infantry charging through smoke, firing improvised weapons with deadly precision, and tearing through lines as though their own lives were expendable currency. His final whisper before unconsciousness was not of victory, but of terror. What shook the chamber most was not the destruction itself, but the manner of it. In galactic history, war always began with ritual, demands, ultimatums, negotiations. Combat was a process steeped in formality, designed as much to preserve order as to inflict damage. But these humans had bypassed every expectation. They had struck without warning, dismantled defenses, and vanished into the void before reinforcements could arrive. There was no pattern to read, no diplomatic message to decode, no demand for territory or resources. Only violence, unannounced and unrelenting. For a council accustomed to predictability, it was a rupture in the fabric of reality. The reptilian admiral hissed in disbelief. The insectoid tactician clattered its mandibles in confusion. The crystalline envoys shifted their refracted light in unease. Entire civilizations represented in the chamber had fought wars lasting centuries, but even those campaigns followed rules. This was something else. As the session closed, a silence heavier than any proclamation lingered in the hall. No one would say it outright, but the thought echoed across every mind: perhaps the humans were not the minor species they had believed. Perhaps the galaxy had underestimated them. And if this was the beginning, none could predict where it would end. The first assault was dismissed by many as a fortunate anomaly, a desperate raid magnified by circumstance. Yet before the Chamber of Galactic Command could draft a coherent response, the second strike fell. This time the target was not a remote outpost but a thriving trade station orbiting a resource-rich planet. Thousands of vessels passed through its docks each cycle, guarded by patrol squadrons and layered sensor grids. Within the span of a single night, the station was crippled, its comms tower severed, its power core sabotaged. By the time reinforcements arrived, docking arms hung twisted in vacuum and escape pods drifted like wreckage in a graveyard. No warning preceded the assault. No demand followed it. Only silence and ruin. The reports arrived at command like thunderclaps. Debates erupted again, but the evidence piled higher. The humans had struck with precision and left nothing that resembled the ritual patterns of interstellar warfare. They did not send envoys. They did not broadcast justifications. They did not mark their vessels with diplomatic insignia. Instead, they scattered confusion, making it impossible for command's analysts to predict where they would appear next. Then came the third blow, in another sector entirely. A supply convoy, fortified by an escort of battle cruisers, vanished. Wreckage discovered days later revealed the cruisers had been disabled first, their engines sabotaged, their captains slain before even realizing they were under coordinated assault. Survivors told of strange tactics. Fake distress calls lured them into formation, only for hidden human vessels to pounce from subspace shadows. When the escorts scrambled to respond, they found their targeting systems already compromised, their communications flooded with static and mocking fragments of human speech. Within minutes, the convoy was reduced to fire. A pattern began to form, though not in the way alien strategists expected. There was no single front, no consistent doctrine. The humans struck where confidence was strongest, stations thought impregnable, fleets considered unassailable, convoys that should have been routine. They did not pursue conquest but disruption. Each strike crippled logistics, spread fear, and undermined trust in command's ability to protect its domains. The Council of Species struggled to agree on interpretation. Some leaders demanded overwhelming retaliation, fleets deployed to human sectors, eradication campaigns to burn Earth's colonies from orbit. Others argued such action might trigger retaliation even worse than what had already unfolded. A small but growing faction spoke with unease, suggesting that humanity's actions were not reckless but calculated, designed to demonstrate capability without overextension. Witnesses from the battlefield painted chilling portraits. Soldiers described human fighters who appeared where defenses were weakest, armed with tools that doubled as weapons, and improvised explosives fashioned from salvaged parts. They did not retreat when cornered, they pressed forward, using their own casualties as opportunities to gain ground. To species accustomed to measured combat, it was the behavior of predators unconcerned with losses, determined only to break the will of their opponents. What unsettled the ranks most was the psychological aftermath. Entire squadrons refused redeployment after witnessing human assaults. Messages circulated in hushed tones: humans could be anywhere, at any time, invisible until the strike fell. Even seasoned officers admitted their subordinates froze at sensor glitches or phantom signals, fearing another unannounced ambush. Morale cracked faster than fleets could be reorganized. The command's advisors attempted countermeasures. They tightened patrol schedules, hardened supply lines, and dispatched reconnaissance drones. Yet humans seemed to anticipate each adjustment, striking in ways that exploited the very precautions intended to stop them. If patrols increased, the humans targeted fuel depots. If drones proliferated, they infiltrated control stations to blind them. Every adaptation bred a new vulnerability, and the humans exploited each one without hesitation. The absence of communication was more terrifying than the attacks themselves. Throughout galactic history, even the fiercest wars contained dialogue, declarations, ultimatums, or post-battle communiques. The humans offered none. Their silence conveyed not indifference but deliberate contempt for tradition. In that void of words, every alien commander saw a reflection of dread, an enemy who owed them nothing, who struck by choice, not necessity. As reports piled higher, one conclusion spread like a contagion. These were not isolated raids. They were a campaign, one designed to erode confidence, fracture alliances, and remind the galaxy that humanity had no intention of playing by established rules. And with each unannounced strike, the fear grew. The galaxy had expected humanity to beg for recognition or bargain for territory. Instead, they had chosen to fight like shadows in the dark, and shadows could not be reasoned with. ChatGPT said. The debates within Galactic Command turned increasingly desperate as analysts dissected the nature of the human campaign. Their findings pointed not to luck but to a deep-rooted difference in how humanity understood conflict. To species that had developed under the stability of great empires, war had become ritualized. Centuries of treaties and codified conduct had dulled the edge of true improvisation. Armies marched in predictable sequences, fleets followed doctrine refined over generations, and even violence was bound by tradition. Humanity was the anomaly, unburdened by ancient rules, shaped instead by constant trial and error across a turbulent history. The record of their homeworld was proof enough. Humans had fought each other for millennia in wars of conquest, ideology, and survival. They had waged battles across deserts, seas, mountains, and skies, learning to adapt not only to opponents but also to the unforgiving environment itself. Every conflict left scars but also innovations, new tools, new strategies, new methods of turning scarcity into leverage. When resources ran low, they learned to stretch every fragment of material into utility. When surrounded, they learned to strike unpredictably, forcing stronger adversaries to make mistakes. That legacy, woven into their culture, had not faded when they reached the stars. Commanders studying battle data saw unsettling signs of this heritage. Human vessels often bore irregular modifications, their hulls marked by hasty welds or unconventional attachments. What appeared crude at first revealed itself as calculated pragmatism. Cargo freighters concealed missile pods. Civilian shuttles carried arrays of sensor scramblers. Mining ships became kinetic projectiles when piloted with deliberate sacrifice. To the orderly fleets of Galactic Command, such irregularity was madness. To humans, it was second nature. Equally disturbing was their refusal to conform to galactic expectations of resource deployment. Other civilizations waged war with fleets meticulously supplied by central authority. Humans operated as if every battlefield were isolated, relying on scavenged parts, hijacked fuel, and improvised arsenals. They turned captured equipment against its owners, repurposing alien technology within days. Where most species required cycles of research and approval, humans thrived on immediacy. Psychological factors deepened the disparity. Alien forces were conditioned to preserve life and maintain cohesion above all else. Retreat, surrender, and negotiation were logical options to minimize loss. Humans treated risk differently. Accounts from survivors described fighters pressing attacks even while wounded, refusing to withdraw until objectives were met. The willingness to trade lives for strategic gains horrified opponents who valued careful balance. To the command, it appeared reckless. To humans, it was a calculation forged from centuries of hard survival. Sometimes the only victory came at unacceptable cost, and they accepted that cost without hesitation. One incident crystallized these fears. At a critical supply hub, human operatives infiltrated under the guise of traders, blending into dock traffic with unnerving ease. Within hours, they had sabotaged power conduits, planted explosives in fuel lines, and disrupted comm relays. When the attack was sprung, the hub collapsed in flames before defenders realized infiltration had occurred. Analysts noted the speed of adaptation. The operatives had exploited vulnerabilities unique to the hub, vulnerabilities no doctrine had ever anticipated. It was not simply a raid, it was evidence of humans tailoring chaos to each situation. Alien officers who reviewed these patterns began to grasp the scale of the challenge. Humanity was not pursuing territory, nor were they fighting for resources in the conventional sense. They were dismantling trust itself, eroding the certainty that had underpinned galactic order for generations. Every surprise attack declared a single message: no fortress was safe, no fleet untouchable, no rule unbreakable. In a moment of quiet reflection, one admiral summarized what others feared to say aloud: humanity did not see war as an interruption of peace but as a familiar state of existence. Their entire civilization carried the instincts of survivors who had never known long eras of security. Against such an adversary, the traditional calculus of war unraveled. The galaxy had expected another species to fold neatly into its hierarchy. Instead, it had uncovered an apex predator of conflict, one that wielded unpredictability as its greatest weapon. The chamber of command shifted from disbelief to fear as losses mounted. Entire sectors demanded reassurance, and the once unshakable confidence of the Empire cracked. Massive fleets were dispatched to human sectors, armadas of a scale rarely mobilized, their presence meant to intimidate and overwhelm. Yet those fleets found themselves chasing shadows. Whenever they advanced, humans refused to meet them head-on. Instead, smaller vessels slipped past patrol lines, cutting supply chains, sabotaging fuel depots, and crippling communications. Ships prepared for grand engagements discovered that victory meant little when their crews starved, their engines ran dry, and their messages never reached allies. Attempts to trap the humans faltered again and again. A carefully laid ambush in the Helix Nebula should have annihilated them. Dozens of cruisers formed an iron wall around a projected flight path, armed with every advantage. Instead, the humans baited the fleet deeper into the nebula and ignited volatile gas pockets, turning the environment into a weapon. Alien hulls burned while human vessels, built for resilience and improvisation, slipped away through routes no strategist had considered viable. What should have been a decisive triumph became a humiliation that spread panic through the ranks. With each failure, morale sank further. Command officers attempted to enforce discipline, but whispers spread unchecked. Soldiers spoke of unseen enemies lurking in every shadow. Convoy crews jumped at sensor echoes, convinced the next attack would strike without warning. Recruitment declined as fear took hold. Some sectors even refused deployments, their populations rioting at the prospect of facing what they now called the silent storm. The perception of invulnerability that had long upheld the Empire fractured faster than command could issue proclamations. Desperation drove the Council to escalate. New weapons were rushed into production, fortifications erected along borders, and propaganda campaigns declared humanity weak and unsustainable. But these measures only revealed insecurity. Each fortified outpost became another target, each broadcast another promise the humans delighted in shattering. When command reinforced its stations, humans struck at logistics hubs. When supply lines doubled their guards, humans severed relay networks. It was as though every defensive measure fed directly into human strategy. Political unity faltered under the strain. Some factions demanded immediate extermination of humanity, scorched earth campaigns to erase them from the stars. Others argued for negotiation, fearing that continued escalation would only worsen losses. Accusations flew across the chamber. Alliances that had stood for centuries strained to breaking. In the chaos, humanity's strategy revealed its brilliance. They had not merely attacked fleets or stations, they had undermined the trust that bound the Great Alliance together. Command began to realize that humanity's greatest weapon was not their ships or soldiers but their refusal to abide by convention. Their unpredictability made preparation nearly impossible. Even when alien fleets scored occasional victories, the cost was so high that triumph felt indistinguishable from defeat. Commanders returned with shattered squadrons, hollow successes that only deepened dread. The culmination of these fears arrived when humans broadcast their first message. It was short, transmitted across captured channels, a declaration stripped of ornament. We never announce. We strike. Adapt or fall. The words echoed across the chamber, chilling in their simplicity. Unlike the ritual speeches of other civilizations, it carried no threats, no demands, no offers of peace. It was a statement of nature, a reflection of how humanity intended to wage war. For the first time, the Empire's leaders faced a reality they could not dismiss. Humanity was no longer a nuisance on the galactic fringe. They were a force rewriting the rules, shattering centuries of order with nothing but audacity, adaptability, and the will to strike without warning. And as the chamber descended into bitter silence, each delegate understood what none dared admit aloud: the galaxy was losing control. Galactic Command could no longer disguise its failures. The unrelenting pace of human strikes had forced every admiral, strategist, and diplomat to concede a truth that only months before would have been laughed out of the chamber. Humanity was not an annoyance but an adversary capable of reshaping the balance of power. The council that once debated the minutiae of trade tariffs now argued only over how to endure a war they had never imagined. Each report that arrived from the front carved deeper cracks into the Empire's facade of stability. The final measure of recognition came not from rhetoric but from necessity. A fortress world, fortified with layers of orbital platforms, shield grids, and entrenched legions, was chosen as the symbol of resistance. Billions of citizens were assured that this bastion would stand as proof of the Empire's superiority. Yet when the assault came, it unfolded with the same terrifying rhythm that had marked every prior strike. The humans did not march in with fleets large enough to match Command's numbers. They dissected the fortress piece by piece. Communications failed first, infiltrated by signals no countermeasure could block. Power grids collapsed in cascading failures. Then precision bombardments opened paths for ground incursions. By the time reinforcements arrived, the defenders had been shattered, not through brute force but through relentless dismantling of everything they trusted. This defeat broke more than a stronghold. It shattered the last illusion of superiority. Species that had believed themselves untouchable now faced the undeniable reality that humans had fought them to stalemate and beyond, using fewer ships, fewer resources, and no adherence to tradition. The realization spread that humanity's strategy had never been conquest in the conventional sense. They did not seek planets to govern or populations to subjugate. They sought acknowledgement, a place in the galactic hierarchy carved not through diplomacy but through fear and respect. Historians within Command began drawing comparisons to ancient epochs when young civilizations had been absorbed into the Empire's order. In every case, assimilation had followed predictable steps: gradual diplomacy, controlled conflict, eventual integration. Humanity rejected that path entirely. By striking first and without warning, they had reversed the cycle. They forced the galaxy to treat them as equals, not as wards awaiting guidance. The Council fractured yet again, but this time their arguments turned toward accommodation. Proposals emerged to open formal communication, to negotiate boundaries, to extend treaties. None of this was offered out of benevolence. It was survival, an attempt to contain a predator that had proven immune to conventional containment. The humans, for their part, responded with deliberate restraint. They accepted recognition but did not disarm, making it clear that respect was the only foundation upon which relations could exist. For many within the chamber, the most haunting change was not political but cultural. Stories spread among soldiers and civilians alike, tales of human ingenuity, of battles won with improvised weapons, of fleets shattered by cunning rather than numbers. These stories grew into legends, whispered with a mixture of awe and dread. In the marketplaces of distant colonies, the phrase, "to fight like a human," became shorthand for ruthless cleverness. Children of alien worlds played games where they pretended to be the silent attackers, while their parents shuddered at the thought that such games mirrored reality. The legacy of the campaign settled across the stars like an unshakable shadow. Humanity had entered galactic history not as petitioners or vassals but as challengers, their name etched in the consciousness of every species that had once dismissed them. They were not admired in the traditional sense, nor were they loved. They were respected in the way one respects the inevitability of storms or the certainty of death. In quiet conversations, leaders of mighty empires admitted the unthinkable. Humanity had proven itself an apex force, not because of numbers or technology, but because of a refusal to bow to the rules that bound everyone else. In the end, Galactic Command stood astonished, forced to accept that a species once overlooked on the fringe had taught the oldest empires a lesson they could never forget. Humans would never again be underestimated. They had rewritten the narrative of war, and the galaxy would tremble at their unannounced footsteps for generations to come.